Hello and welcome to this episode of The Rest is Entertainment with me, Marina Hyde.
And me, Richard Osman. Hello, Marina.
Hello, Richard. How are you?
I'm very well. Lovely to see you.
Well, Richard, we were going to be talking about some other matters today, but news has broken on a Sunday.
Yeah, Tim Davie, Director General of the BBC, has resigned, and Deborah Turness, who's the head of BBC News, has also resigned. God bless them for resigning just in time for us to do the podcast, though.
Yes.
That, I have to say, not everyone shows us the same respect.
Same level of thought.
Yeah, mentioning no names, Claudia and Tess.
We're going to handle that, but it can't all be that sort of froth, of course. We have to deal with some serious service journalism, and for that reason we will also be covering All's Fair, the new legal drama
documentary
starring Kim Kardashian and others.
That some people have said is the worst television programme ever made. We will discuss, but we'll start, shall we, with these two resignations, what's happening at the BBC. Can I frame it in this particular way? There's the two former newspaper editors have come out. David Yelland, who used to edit The Sun, he said essentially there has been a coup. So Tim Davie has left, Deborah Turness has left. David Yelland said there's been a coup by people who've influenced the BBC board and they forced these people out. However, Charles Moore, who was the editor of the Daily Telegraph, says there wasn't a coup. Now, between a former editor of The Sun and former editor of The Telegraph, you want them both to be wrong, but they can't both be wrong.
It's the Argentina-West Germany final you never knew you needed.
Exactly that. So what has happened and why, do we think?
As you say, two people have resigned from the only organisation in public life that people still resign from.
Yeah.
Everyone else has to get sacked. And before we go on, by the way, I should say that my husband works at the BBC. He works in distribution and business development, so nothing to do with editorial. I actually didn't talk to him about this item at all because he was not around last night. But I did talk to other people who I don't actually have to disclose. But by way of background, last week...
Is that what you call it?
Yeah. By way of background, it emerged last week that Michael Prescott, who is an advisor to the BBC on editorial standards, a former advisor, that in October he'd circulated a memo to the BBC board of serious concerns about impartiality that wasn't handled quickly. In fact, there was disagreement amongst the board. I know about how to handle it. And somehow or other, this memo was leaked to The Telegraph, who ran with it last Tuesday. I think it first came out. And there are 3 planks to its serious complaints about impartiality. And I'm just going to go through them because all of them will become relevant in the discussion. So the first and the most significant for these resignations was about a Panorama documentary, which was broadcast in the run-up to last year's presidential election, in which 2 moments of a Trump speech was spliced together to make it appear that he had followed one statement about his MAGA supporters going to the Capitol on January the 6th, 2021, by immediately telling them to fight like hell. So, as we know, we all saw those scenes on the Capitol, and so it appeared much more directly that he had incited.
And those moments were, I think, 50-odd minutes apart.
But I mean, he's a guy who likes to make a long speech, Richard. So they resigned on Sunday. Samir Shah has made an apology on Monday for the Panorama edit, and on Wednesday Michael Prescott will appear before the DCMS Select Committee in Parliament to discuss his memo and other matters.
And I saw some people saying that Samir Shah has not defended the corporation correctly as well, so whether that's another scalp that people want, it feels unlikely to me. It feels like Tim Davie and Deborah Turness, that is like Jonathan and Stephen both leaving the traitors at the same time. It feels like maybe the bloodlust has been sated. I started by saying that the former editor of The Sun had called this a coup. He talks about the BBC board and he says that the elements close to it have worked with hostile newspaper editors, a former PM and enemies of public service broadcasting. So Michael Prescott, who is the guy who did this report, he has ties with Boris Johnson. Boris Johnson appointed him to advise Ofcom. Robbie Gibb, who is on the BBC board, was a former comms advisor to Theresa May. If you were on the side of people who suggested there is a coup, there is certainly a cadre of people who've been in and around Boris Johnson, all of whom seem to be coalescing on this story.
I do notice that people have said that. And I have to say that I think everybody has sort of become a citizen journalist over the last few decade and sits on social media and makes connections in a kind of you join the dots way. And I always feel like, no, I'm terribly sorry. If you want to make that connection, you must explicitly join the dots rather than just sort of say, well, there you go, because that is a form of conspiracy. There may be a concerted effort here. amongst these people. There have also been concerted efforts on the other side before to defend people, to do different things. And I think it's probably really unhelpful to get into talking about this as some kind of coup, some kind of like war, anything like that. Then you're playing on their turf. Once it's a war, it's something that you or they can win, and it won't be you if you're the BBC. And I think that it's much more useful to talk about it in the terms I hope I tried to talk about it as an inflection point for some of these issues which have been bubbling and festering for a long time and not actually gripped. The second problem was an institutional problem, he alleged, with the suppressing of stories about the trans issue, with gender critical views being stifled, negative stories or stories asking difficult questions not being offered as balance to stories which were much more positive. And the third problem is an institutional problem with the coverage of the war in Gaza by BBC Arabic. So there were three different things. The first of those is ultimately what forced the resignations.
The Trump one.
Trump and his White House have crowed over the resignations already. And I think his part in them is very, very significant. What he has shown is that he is utterly willing to sue news organisations. He's sued CBS, ABC, New York Times, Wall Street Journal. Those are just a few of them. ABC ended up having to settle for 15 million, CBS for 16 million. Now, that's under US libel laws, which are almost, in most people's view, non-existent. If he were to be a libel tourist, which I don't see why he wouldn't, you can see the nature of the man. If you came to London, he would sue the BBC and given our laws, would probably win. So that, I think, was a really, really significant factor in seeing how this would play out. The other thing I would like to say before we go on, because I think it's extraordinary that we don't talk about this. And the backdrop to all of this, I read this morning, it's the front page of every single newspaper. Everyone says it's an existential crisis. Here are some facts, not alternative facts, as Donald Trump would say, but actual facts. The BBC is the most trusted news organisation in the entire world. This is a world where 70% of countries don't even have a free press. Its existence is the single and proven reason why we in this country do not have the damaging polarised news market that they have, say, in the United States of America. They have a huge polarised news market and a massive problem with distrust for all different news organisations because people are siloed into their different ones. No news organisation in the US gets more than 25% of people frequently consuming it. Now, in the UK, more than 60% of the population frequently consume BBC News, okay? Primarily through the World Service, the BBC is the country's most recognised cultural export, okay? I mean, I think it's something quite good. That's quite good. But you don't hear that now because every single sort of senior politician has said this is a completely in crisis. It's like a lot of people would like to have that sort of crisis.
Yeah, I'd like to have the BBC crisis more than I'd like to have the crisis, say, at News International.
Now, all of those things are incredibly precious, okay? And they are loathed by the BBC's enemies. And they're definitely worth fighting for more than ever in an atomised and polarised world.
Well,
but that's why it really matters when things are wrong. And these are all mistakes. Well, these are all big mistakes, and I think you've just got to say that. You have to remember that this is an organisation beset by political enemies for all sorts of reasons.
Yeah, outside and inside, by the way. And worst of all is BBC News. I think Tim Davie said it's very difficult to run the BBC in the current febrile cultural climate, and I suspect there's a fairly febrile cultural climate within BBC News as well, less so within entertainment and what have you. So Tim Davie leaves, and ostensibly he's leaving, as you say, because of that Trump edit. And this was brought up earlier last week and nobody apologised. And as you say, we're trying to work out why nobody made an immediate apology, because that's the simple thing to do there, because those things definitely happen. And, the simple thing to do is you put a little white
Well, I thought that was really significant all of last week that they weren't.
Yeah, exactly. No one could come together to agree a line on that. Now, the last time I saw Tim Davie, it was at an event, I'd say a couple of months ago, and it was the height of all the Gaza stuff and Bob Villan and all these things. And Tim Davie is, if nothing else, very, very irrepressible and a very irrepressible defender of the BBC, and will absolutely always goes to bat and always on the front foot, always positive, always making the case for the sort of things that you were talking about. And the last time I saw him in the midst of all of that, for the first time ever, I thought, oh my God, there's something slightly broken about you here. I feel like you have had enough. And this feels to me, because I think that his resignation was a surprise to people, it feels like he was waiting for the next open door to just go, I do not need to do this anymore. Somebody who could, there's a lot of, there's all sorts of people who work at the BBC, but he's someone who could get pretty much any job he wanted in any industry he wanted. He's very good. He's very good at what he does. You might not want him to be the DG, but he is definitively, his market value is very high. But he's got to wake up every morning and deal with these things like constantly, as you say, people from the inside, people from the outside, people calling him all sorts of names. And there comes a point where as a human being, you just think, well, why would I put myself through this all day, every day? And he's probably stayed at the BBC longer than he should have done. He's been there 20 odd years in various roles, but I think he is there because he believes this is the right thing to do. He took it through the end of the last Tory government. He took it through Boris Johnson, who we'll talk about later because his paw prints are over this as well. But, took it through his prime ministership and essentially sailed it to where we are now. I think probably he just had enough. No one will ever like you if you're the DG, and program makers will never like the DG. And every program maker I know says, oh, he used to be a Tory councillor and this, that or the other, and you just want to go, you know what, half the people in Britain are Tories. You might just have to get used to that sort of thing. And if you think that Tim Davie is your enemy and the enemy of broadcasting in Britain, maybe you choose your enemies a little bit better. So I think it's one of those things where he probably was the right person to lead the BBC into this next charter renewal.
The difficulty with the role is that you are two different roles. In one, you have a business role, in which I think people widely think he's done very well at, and then you have the editor-in-chief role, and that is where all of the scandals in recent times have come from. But or whatever it is, Greg Wallace, the news, all of these news things, Bob Villan, these are sort of editorial roles. We will talk in a minute about runners and riders and why there maybe aren't any. Who would want to do that job? Literally, who would want to do it? It's like being England football manager. Everyone else can do it better than you. Everyone else can tell you how to do it, and it always ends in failure. Yes, well, let's come to that in a minute. But I do think that Deborah Turness did want the BBC board to respond to this memo much more quickly and to respond last week, but they couldn't agree, and this sense of drift or whatever happened. But I totally agree with you that it's one battle after another, and eventually you don't want to have any more battles. One of the things Tim Davie mentioned or alluded to in his resignation letter was the sort of fact of being a Director General at this time.
Yeah.
The role of the Director General in the current era, every single mistake is yours. You don't get to stand up at the dispatch box like David Lammy, to pick another example from last week, and just say, oh, this is everyone else's fault, this is my predecessor's fault, this is, blame on my opponents, and really just go back to being potentially quite inept or whatever it is, and waiting to be sacked, which is what, as I said, every single other person in public life does. No one resigns anymore except from people from the BBC. You've got to take it, if you're Director General, all the time. Greg Wallace is your fault, Bob Villan's your fault. Now, this isn't the case in lots and lots of other companies. And there are some people who say, well, should he have appointed a deputy who was more front-facing in some different way, or reconstituted that sort of senior thing so that you have someone you're not always the lightning rod for every single tiny bit. But when I hear people like Nigel Farage, who's obviously thrilled about this, saying, this is an existential crisis for the BBC, brackets the most trusted news organisation in the world, but okay, and saying we need to get someone from business, and Richard Tice saying we've got to get someone from business to clear all this out. Okay, I always just think, okay, you sweet summer child, okay, you don't understand anything about your precious business, okay, because the only people who cop this much flack in public life are either politicians or tech bosses, right? That's it. Politicians, it's a non-political role, so you have to discount those people. Tech bosses get paid literally billions for companies they effectively have ownership over, and they have shown that because of those two things, they don't actually have to care about any of the criticism they take, and they're not going to do anything about it. Tim Davie gets paid a lot. He gets paid £547,000 a year, okay? But in terms of like how much flack you get, and yes, it's a form of public service and it's a form of power and whatever, and I'm sure, but having to listen to Nigel Farage talk about, people in business, let me explain. If Nigel Farage is the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, as he keeps telling us he's going to be, there will be no BBC that will be acceptable for him other than a dead BBC. Now, he is a politician. He is a leading politician. He is a party leader who presents a nightly, we have to call it a current affairs show, because he knows it would be in breach of all sorts of Ofcom rules if he presents a current affairs show, which is on a channel called GB News and contains news. He doesn't think that's a conflict of interest. I mean, I've heard enough from Mr. Ethics. But there is no BBC that will satisfy him. It's very interesting who is crowing about this. Donald Trump, we've got to listen to him crowing about it. Boris Johnson, when he let down the public trust, it took 57 ministers to resign over 36 hours before he finally accepted that maybe he wasn't the public servant he was telling everybody he was. So it's rather difficult having to take it from these type of people.
And no one here has blinkers on. We're aware of waste in the BBC. We're aware of issues in the BBC, problems in the BBC. We definitively are.
I think all of these things are very, very serious breaches and are big problems, and they do need to be dealt with. And the fact that incredibly senior people have gone is actually, it can and should be turned into a great inflection point to deal with a number of these issues. And if people within the BBC, some of whom will have been a drag on dealing with these issues, don't wake up and realise that this is a huge moment, then that is going to be a big problem. But that will require strong leadership. And it's quite, as you say, it is quite difficult. In the old days, every time a Director General resigned, and they resign quite often because, as I say, they're the only people who still resign, there would be immediate lists of runners and riders that you really thought, well, there's lots of different people. Now there are so few, and I think it's so significant that people are saying, what about Charlotte Moore? Charlotte Moore is a former director of programme. She's brilliant, but she's left, and she once applied for a Director General job, and Tim Davie got it that round. And I think that people, even when she left, felt, well, maybe in a few years she'll come back and be Director General because she's lots of people's hope. But are you asking me whether I think she'll do it?
Well, she's gone to a big drama company, Left Bank, and she's having the time of her life because you know what? She's not being hounded every 5 seconds. By the way, every single person listening to this, myself included, we make mistakes all the time. Now, these are serious mistakes, but we all make mistakes, and the whole point of any organisation is how do you deal with mistakes? How do you move on from mistakes? How do you learn from mistakes? And what have you? If you are Charlotte Moore, if you're anyone who's left the BBC, look at Lineker. Every time you see him now, it's like he's walking on air. Because, he can say what he wants, he can do what he wants, and people are not, firing at him all the time.
But we should remember that public service must remain a kind of lodestar in our national life, and that people should still want to put themselves forward for difficult
public service. You wouldn't want to do it.
I agree with you.
No reason to do it. No, you know what? You wouldn't be a politician. You would not be Director General of the BBC. You would not do any of these things.
That's
Job
the true
done,
crisis.
Well poisoned.
That is the true crisis. It is so much bigger than all of this. Is that the idea of going into public service in any of these roles, and it doesn't mean on the kind of layers below where lots of people might still. And I think that the real serious crisis is that this morning, despite full spectrum coverage of this issue, there's like these half-hearted things like, maybe Charlotte Moore will come back and do it. My God, 10, 15, 20 years ago, you'd have had a list of 10 people.
I mean, listen, Director General they've always, as you say, resigned. Greg Dyke resigned over the Hutton inquiry into David Kelly. So George Entwistle, who people might not know, but Roger Mosey was talking this morning, said the problem with Tim Davie is not a journalist. You need a journalist in charge of the BBC. And it's like ever useful to have a journalist in charge of anything. And the last time they had a journalist in charge was George Entwistle, who'd come up through the ranks at the BBC, Newsnight, all that kind of stuff. And he lasted just under 2 months, and he had all the stuff about Savile, and he had the Lord McAlpine stuff on Newsnight. So they got rid of him after 2 months. They get rid of everybody. Every Prime Minister wants to get rid of the Director General of the BBC, going all the way back. You look at Alistair Milne.
Thatcher tried to get rid of him for Death on the Rock.
Well, she did. Yeah. She brought in Marmaduke Hussey as the chairman of the BBC. So they got rid of him. You got Churchill and Eden. They both had run-ins with Sir Ian Jacob. I mean, this is how far back all this stuff goes. Wilson complained about Charles Curran. He complained about Hughie Green. It's always the case that politicians on the left and on the right want to get rid of whoever is at the BBC.
It is now. Even so, it is nothing like it is now.
Yeah.
I genuinely believe that the only comparable flack, as I say, is like being a tech boss. And every time, we see Mark Zuckerberg saying, I'm not even going to bother saying sorry anymore. These people don't care. This must be an inflection point because it's happened, it's bad, and you might as well try and make some lemonade.
What's your take on BBC News? And because from my perspective, and I come at almost everything from the world of entertainment and documentaries and these things, and the BBC seems to be a fairly healthy place, certainly, creatively, in terms of ratings, in terms of personnel, it seems to be on a...
No, I can't believe we're not talking about like last Thursday. This is the sadness. You're not talking about last Thursday night on BBC where you just had this unbelievable run of shows, the new series of Celebrity Race Across the World.
That lovely Hamza Yassin show that's on at the moment. I mean, they are on a run of form, and I think Tim Davie by and large has always let people just run things like Charlotte Moore, like Kate Phillips. That's one of the things that he was good at. He just said, you're the program maker. I will sit here and take the flak, which felt like the job that he was doing almost non-stop until now where it's got too much for him. But BBC News seems to be the thing where the real issues come up. Greg Wallace is an issue, but that's an HR issue at any company you're at. There are always going to be those things, especially when you've got, hundreds of suppliers and, just hundreds and hundreds of hours of content. But BBC News, there constantly seems to be this suggestion of some sort of institutional bias from one side or the other.
And some kind of, and different siege mentalities and internal and sometimes, aggressive siege mentalities from different groups. I would say that in the case of the Trump edit, I mean, really, it's extraordinary that it's got all the way up to the very top and those people have gone, because really you should just say to the people who made the programme, you're not making any more programmes, you can't do that. But because nothing was done about that, in the end it got to such a pitch that the people who are going are the two most significant people. I certainly think that in terms of people's perception of how the gender debate has been covered, I think that there is definitely, there are suggestions that there's a desk that people had to run stories through and that they weren't allowed to run gender critical stories in any way. Absolutely, people are furious when they see male rapists described as women, simply because of what they claim is their gender identity now they're within the prison system.
There was an issue with Martine Croxall where she refused to say pregnant people, she said pregnant women with an eye roll, and I think that has an awful lot of sympathy from an awful lot of people.
Yes. The BBC remains an organisation better capable of lacerating itself and beating itself up publicly than anyone else in the world. And it's sort of extraordinary that, I mean, it's really interesting watching the American reaction to this. Obviously, they don't have the same type of news organisation. As I say, this is a precious treasure, and I agree that this is a big mistake.
It has to be held to a much higher.
It has to be held to higher standards than any of their news that everyone hates and is polarised and what have you. Of course, it sort of sticks in the craw that Nigel Farage is willing to appear on Fox News all day long, even though he knows very well what those presenters did on January the 6th.
And by the way, it's okay to do all that. You can be a hypocrite because he has a certain political view which he wants to prevail. We just have to take it as what it is. We have to. That's the job. That's what he is doing. He wants to dismantle all of this stuff. That's what he wants to do. So there's no point pretending that something isn't happening that is happening, or something, or the other way around. That's what's happening. If there's a culture war, it's the war against culture, and it's the war against the BBC and all of that stuff. That's what he's doing. He's allowed to. People are absolutely allowed to support him. He's allowed to do it in whatever way he wants. Other people are allowed to fight back and disagree with him, and that's what we're doing here. We're just saying it's in plain sight now. Those people are pointing at a coup, and again, you can always point to these things. But Michael Prescott himself was the chief political correspondent of the Sunday Times, and I think the political editor of the Sunday Times. Robbie Gibb, who was Theresa May's press secretary, he's on the board at the BBC. So there are people in high places at the BBC who, were you a conspiracy theorist, you think, well, I could see why you might team together and do things. So that's the case against. I think it's much more complicated than that. Would you agree?
I certainly would. And if you were on the other side, I would say that people will say, oh, look at this. There's a sort of leftist conspiracy at the BBC, and they can point to cherry pick all sorts of different other things, and they may have a case in some of those with some of those arguments.
Funnily enough, Charles Moore, the former editor of the Daily Telegraph, he said there's a metropolitan left bias at the BBC. And by the way, I'm sure there is, but there's both. Yeah. As I say, that's always been the case, is people arguing both ways, and you can argue both ways. All we want, really, is to have this incredible organisation at the heart of our culture, making great comedy, great documentary, making television that people care about, and television that makes us a better country and a better place. There are people who don't want that. And
being the most trusted news brand in the world, and that is something worth hanging on to. And I do think there is no other organisation like it. It's so interesting. You just go into so many parallel worlds when you're looking at the reaction to this, because there are people like Nigel Farage saying, this is an existential crisis. I can't, we've been saying for so long it's completely rotten. And there's a whole other group of people saying, well, all they've done is serve me Nigel Farage, the BBC, for how long? So you think, or there's people who are saying the BBC is completely biased towards Israel, and then there are other people saying the BBC have taken anything Hamas says as gospel, and there are these just complete parallel worlds even within this argument, and there is no other organisation in the world like that where all of those realities are perceived to be definitely true by different groups of people. So nonetheless, despite all of that, I think it's very unhelpful to get caught up in these kind of conspiracy things. You can cherry pick all sorts of these things.
You can.
The fact is that these were mistakes, and they are in probably all cases indicative of larger problems that do need to be gripped.
It's worth just keeping our eyes open as to what's happening and why, who's happy about it, who's not happy about it, and where we go next. And
acknowledging that the true crisis, I'm afraid, is in public service, and that why would anyone wish to go into it? And fewer people of high calibre do. Well, I think that this is why now they're talking about the next Director General having a sort of journalistic background in some way. I always used to think that the Archbishop of Canterbury, you'd have an atheist and then like a gibbering idiot who actually believed it, then an atheist and a gibbering idiot who actually believed it. That was the one-on-one-off principle, also applied to quality of Ridley Scott movies. But in this case, with Director Generals, they're always course-correcting as to how the last one went. So
yeah, you're always dressing for yesterday's weather.
Yeah. In this case, I think people are thinking that Tim Davie did absolutely brilliantly on positioning the BBC in terms of business and the future and all those sorts of things. But in terms of as an editorial role, the fact is, it is such an enormous role to do both of those things.
Oh, it's
and
crazy.
To be the only person that it's always you in front of the cameras, it's always you on the stage, it's always you at the podium, and it's always your fault, whatever happens, I think is very difficult. And I wonder whether the next person will think, I want to empower maybe more senior people to be a bit more front-facing in that way, because I think otherwise it is really very, very difficult to exist in this era, which all of these resignation letters made clear that this era is something particular.
If you're an actual business person, then the first thing to do would be you would gut it for parts and sell off loads of it, and then not worry about public service broadcasting and line your own pockets. Speaking around, I talked to all the people who, as you say, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, would have been on the list of who would do it, and nobody seems interested. I mean, maybe Alex Mahon from Channel 4, because she's left Channel 4, but I don't know why she would want to do it. She's out in business now, but she could, she'd understand the political side of it. She understands how to run an organisation. If you're any of the big creative, any of the big dogs, and I don't mean Jonathan and Stephen, but if you're any of those people, how about Joe Marler?
Marler for DG.
I do think it's a good. He resigned it's a good way to resign. Resigning over the Trump thing is good because he leaves he's not besmirched by that in any way. There's a million things he could have resigned over that would have delayed his return to lucrative work elsewhere. But if you're resigning over Trump, I think everyone.
And you would hope it would head off the possibility of legal action against the BBC, which would be incredibly damaging. Now that flighty froth is dealt with, shall we go into a break ahead of discussing Kim Kardashian's new drama?
Yeah.
This episode is brought to you by Sky and Sky's new original film Nuremberg in cinemas Friday the 14th of November.
Now, the trials in Nuremberg weren't just a courtroom drama. They're also the story of how Allied forces shaped the reality of international justice for generations to come.
At the centre of this story is a battle of the minds between Lieutenant Colonel Douglas Kelly, an American psychiatrist played by Rami Malek, and his most infamous and formidable patient, Hitler's second-in-command, Hermann Goering, portrayed by Russell Crowe.
And Russell Crowe shows Goering as a calculated performer, playing to the gallery at all opportunities, turning every encounter into a contest of psychology and ideology.
2 Academy Award winners, 1 courtroom stage, directed by James Vanderbilt. Nuremberg's star-studded cast includes Leo Woodall, John Slattery, Richard E. Grant, Michael Shannon and Mark O'Brien.
And 80 years on, the legacy of the Nuremberg trials remain unshakable. The trial that defined modern justice in many, many ways. A story of taking phenomenal risks in the pursuit of truth and justice.
Watch Sky Original Nuremberg, only in cinemas, Friday the 14th of November.
Welcome back, everyone. Lovely to have you back. We've done the BBC and the Director General. Now for the programme that's been described as the worst programme ever made. It's on Disney+.
Not the BBC.
It stars Kim Kardashian, not Tim Davie, and it's called All's Fair. The worst programme ever made, Marina? Discuss.
Well, okay, this is one of 387 Ryan Murphy shows currently available via Disney Plus or on Hulu or whatever. And anyway, we actually have done a bonus series on Ryan Murphy, which delves deep into this complex man, I think is the euphemism. And all's fair, right? It's described as Kim Kardashian's show. It's not actually Kim Kardashian's show, really, because it also has an unbelievable roster of talent, not to not put her in acting talent, although I do think it helps to be able to move your face. Naomi Watts, Glenn Close, Teyana Taylor, Sarah Paulson, and Niecy Nash. Now, all of their names are hysterical. They play divorce lawyers. It's an all-female divorce law team. They're all extremely rich and live in Los Angeles. And everyone is wearing gloves all the time, which I'm going to come back to just in the hope that I might have worked out why that's significant, but they're all wearing gloves all of the time.
And so far, by the way, it sounds amazing.
But it is genuinely terrible. It has, it's got, the reason we're talking about it particularly is because it's rare that something gets a 0-star review. But that was not its only 0-star. It was, when it started out, I think it was on sort of 0% on Metacritic.
It is now, things have got a lot better. It's now 6% on Rotten Tomatoes.
Screaming up the Rotten Tomatoes chart on 6%. It does contain like some of the just genuinely appalling lines like, let's put the team in teamwork.
Team is already in teamwork.
Yeah.
Yeah,
it swears,
that's where that comes from.
Yeah.
It's like saying, let's put the team in teamwork and the work. So, like, as a team, we work together. I'm calling it teamwork.
That would have been great, because that would have blah-de, 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 and a bit more of Ryan Murphy's style.
Is that okay? Oh, I forgot to say, she's wearing gloves.
Yeah. It's the absolute apotheosis of tell, don't show. Everyone is telling you all the time. Like, I'm aware that she's rich, but then we have to have a close-up of her Birkin handbag on her car seat as she's driving to her house.
It is so there's a Gucci handbag in a later scene that is so foregrounded you can barely make out anything else in the screen.
But having said that, it is, and despite all of these terrible reviews, it is Hulu's most watched scripted show debut in 3 years. So joke's on you, cultural police.
I mean, is it though? But is it? Because I mean, what's it up? Firstly, what's it up against? Secondly, its first episode is the most watched for 3 years on Hulu. Is the second episode and the third episode? We shall find out. Just to give some of the reviews, The Guardian called it fascinatingly, incomprehensibly, existentially terrible. The Telegraph called it a crime against television. The idea is brilliant, right? These three female divorce lawyers who leave one of the sort of, like a blue chip company, set up their own. The idea of the incredible, they are ultra rich. That's fun. It's fun to see how they live. It's about these three women. It's about their personal lives. You got different cases each week, but everything about it is off. I would say the cases themselves are unconvincing. They're too easily solved. I mean, there's
what were you expecting? A cinema verite look into the the LA divorce market?
Well, Ryan Murphy has made some great TV.
Yeah, but less and less. The trouble is he's diluting it more and more with this. That's the trouble.
But if you look at the writers on it, so John Robin Bates, who's one of the writers on this, okay? A couple of things I know about John Robin Bates is he's been nominated for a Pulitzer twice. His scripts on The West Wing were the ones that Aaron Sorkin said, that's the one I had to do least to. I could just shoot it as was, these scripts. So this guy is no idiot. Ryan Murphy is no idiot.
Glenn Close is good at acting as well, but
I know,
not in this.
But isn't it fascinating? Because I think they're going for something which is a very, very high camp, which is a very, very unapologetic, different form of television.
I don't think they meant to go for it. I think it turned out so bad.
No.
They lent into it.
But you can I'm listening to the lines as they come out. The scripts are wipe clean. The scripts they're not trying to delve too deeply into anything. They're trying to be all surface and all gloss, and then presumably as the series goes on, sort of go. However, there is more going on.
Well, speaking of people who are good people who should have known, but I was so depressed to see that Teyana Taylor in it, who, in one battle after another, is the absolute star of the first section of the film as the sort of revolutionary girlfriend, and now is playing some junior lawyer who's just a sort of side piece. And I I genuinely think at the moment, although it's got great ratings for Hulu, Richard, I would say that Ryan Murphy has been the brown finger to this. Everything he's touched in this has turned to shit. If I really do think everybody in this is dreadful.
It's fascinating to work out why it's so bad.
Why it is so bad.
With so many good people involved.
But also the attempts to which the lengths to which they've gone to make it a show for our era, which is it's going to go viral. So you're going to get all these other articles. Like there will be so many articles about like gloves are having a moment. It would be like Claudia on Traitors. And now this. Now, normally you need 3 for a trend piece, but I have to say there are so many gloves in this that you're just going to get all of those things. So you get all of this kind of side stuff where people will write about your show, even if it's to say it's bad. As Kim said, she did a post the other day saying, are you watching the most critically acclaimed show of the year? Because it's a joke and it doesn't really matter. Yeah. And so there's all of that. In terms of the actual aesthetic, I would say it's really interesting. In the same way that we talked a lot about The Real Housewives and how that franchise took these fictional worlds and dragged them back into the real world, or a version of the real world, a sort of augmented and managed reality, and became the sort of biggest show on the internet. It's like, as we said, like 80% of traffic at any one point on the internet is GIFs and reaction shots from those shows, which are used to gloss our entire culture, political and otherwise. This show, you've heard of straight to video, straight to DVD, as they used to call it. This is straight to GIF, okay? This show, every single thing that happens on this show is designed to be put after, the next government shutdown, or it's just designed to be a reaction GIF for everything. So all the lines and all the everything, it's now taken the housewives and just kind of bumped them back into the realm of almost fiction. But, I'm looking at Kim Kardashian in this, and she's got a crappy husband. Yeah. She looks just like Kim Kardashian and everything. She's got all the same bags.
That's not her fault.
She's driving up to a house that I think she'd think is slightly below her standards, even though it's
it's a nice house, isn't it? Yeah.
The way that these shows will make money and the way they'll get audience and the way that the Kardashians make money is off the female gaze.
Yeah.
So this is, women will tune in and watch this and love to hate it, but it will be clipped for every possible reaction. You're going to be seeing reaction GIFs from this.
It doesn't seem to love women, this show particularly.
No, for a show that's literally all about women, this demeans women in every possible way, but pretends it doesn't. So there's that. It's obviously executive produced by her momager, Kris Jenner. By the way,
I find it amazing that it's bad because it's got so many exec producers. You think it would be great. Ryan Murphy, Kim Kardashian, Glenn Close are all exec producers. Sarah Paulson, Naomi Watts, Niecy Nash, John Robin Bates, Joe Bacon, Jamie Pacino, Lynn Green, Richard Levine, Anthony Hemingway, I'm Still Going, Kris Jenner, Alexis Martin Woodall, Eric Cofton, Scott Robertson. We've got 16 executive producers there. Is that a record? That's almost a series of The Traitors.
Yeah.
And then that's not before you get to the co-executive producers.
Yeah.
I saw in one of the press releases that said that Kris Jenner has committed to exec produce. He says, she's committed to exec produce. That's like me committing to having a nap. You're just like, I've committed to not doing anything at all, but you paying me some money. Okay, yeah, do you know what? I am actually going to, for once in my life, I'm actually going to commit. I would actually sign that. So presumably I don't have to do anything. You're just going to, you just send me that, you've got my account details. Oh, do you know, people call me commitment phobic, but look at me now, committed to exec produce. There's a lot of executive producers there. And the whole thing feels like it's been, a lot of Ryan Murphy stuff is packaged and he does some great stuff, but it feels like they've kind of gone, look, it's Kim, so can we get some heavyweights here? And you go, well, let's get Naomi Watts in. It'd be amazing to get Glenn Close. Well, look, Glenn will do it, but it's just being an exec producer and you have to bring her in for X, Y, or Z. It feels like everyone kind of trusts, he's still got money in the bank, Ryan Murphy, in terms of reputation, because he's done some extraordinary things and made a lot of successes. So people will still take a call from Ryan Murphy and still say yes to something. So he can get this amazing cast together. But when they got there, it feels like no one was really in charge of making it good. It could be brilliant. The aesthetic is almost right. The script is wrong, as you say. It's all tell, don't show, all of it, all the way through. It's this is who I am. This is how show us.
But it achieves what it wants because it achieves it by this.
I don't know if it does achieve what it wants.
Anything just now needs to be. Can it be clipped down, cut down into reaction?
But
videos?
It needs to be funnier. It just the script.
Well, it will be once it's applied to events in real life as a GIF. That's how it will. This thing will exist.
That's not. But you can have that and also make it brilliant. If that's the aesthetic you're going for, you can do that, but still have a great script.
But
the
why
stuff
bother?
in between the GIFs could also, because it's just as easy. It takes just as long to write a funny, clever script as it does to write a dumb, stupid script.
What?
It's the same
That's
amount
the
of
most
time.
ridiculous take
No,
I've
it's
ever
not.
heard. No, it does.
Because you just get
it's much
people who are
hard-
good at it. Of course, it's not.
I mean, some of those are quite good, but
they
come
are,
up with this.
Yeah, but it's not.
So they must have found it hard,
Oh
or
my
unless
God.
the brief changed halfway through.
But what I'm saying is this would have taken them a long time to write. Just to write this level of inanity and to write to this sort of aesthetic that someone's trying to get at, I bet was an incredibly painful and long process. Where if you take someone like John Robin Bates and Aaron Sorkin says to him, write this episode, right, he can do that, and I bet that takes him, I bet his best ever episode of The West Wing took him the same amount of time as an episode of this. I bet it took the same amount of time. It's just he was allowed to be good.
That's interesting. Okay. Can I just say that did you see all the girls turned out from All's Fair to a certain event this weekend, which I just have to talk about?
Oh, what was it?
It was Kris Jenner's 70th birthday on Saturday night, which she held at Jeff Bezos and Lauren Sanchez's house in Beverly Hills.
Oh my God, that's catnip for you.
Yeah, I know. Well, you know she's had this new facelift, Kris Jenner, that we're all supposed to talk about like it's the first actually important artwork of the early 21st century. So that facelift was on show. Can I just, because I was crying with laughter at the hysterical guest list, can I just read this out to you?
I love this, yeah.
Okay, Martha Stewart, Snoop Dogg, Vin Diesel, Bill Gates, Adele, various Hiltons, Sia, will.i.am, Oprah and Gayle, obviously, Mariah Carey, Babyface, Mark Zuckerberg, Justin Bieber, Prince Harry and Meghan. What surprised me about this party, which I thought was which was to slightly bring it back to All's Fair, that kind of like, it's just going to be so Route One, is that they all had to get out onto the street, these people. So all of the arrivals are people who hadn't realised they'd have to arrive on the street and fight through all the paparazzi who are outside. And then I was thinking, I mean, Jeff Bezos, he must have in and out gates, right? For wherever this place in LA that he lives. And, you know, my thoughts on the houses in Los Angeles. But otherwise, Beverly Hills is even more of a sort of cultural failure than I'd imagined. So then I looked it up. He lives in Jack Warner's house, okay, which was built in the 1930s. It's basically got an internal road system. Any of those people could have been dropped at the front door. So this is all by design.
Yeah, of course
this is the thing about all of these things. They want it to look like that all the time. They want it, I mean, as you say, it costs a lot of money to look that cheap, as it were. They want it to look bad. And I think that is the designated aesthetic. I don't think that Ryan Murphy would admit for 1 second that this didn't come off in the way that he'd wanted it to be. I'm sure lots of people who worked on the show are just like, let's get through this. But I don't think he for 1 second would admit it in the same way that this is how they live.
But my point is, you can have every single bit of that, but also make it better. There's just stick a couple of actual proper jokes in there. I mean, that's easily done. It can be pithy, it can be short, the reactions can be exactly what you want, but just make it funnier, make it a little bit more real, make the cases a bit more real, make the characters not more sympathetic, but make them more rounded. I mean, it's really simple little fixes.
Yeah, any episode of Real Housewives is better and has had more thought go into it.
Can I say something controversial?
Yeah.
When the three of them who set up this business are sitting around the table, Niecy Nash, Naomi Watts and Kim Kardashian, and they're chatting, there's a terrible scene right at the beginning where we see them 10 years ago and then we fast forward 10 years and go, what's been your favourite case we've done in the last 10 years? And then they each explain a case as if the others weren't there. And they go, oh, yes, no, we know. Sorry, it's our company.
We work together.
So we know you don't need to explain to us who that was. You go, well, I had this client. Yeah, we know we all had that client. Anyway, terrible scene. If you were to say to me, as I come down from Mars, you said of these three actors, Niecy Nash, Kim Kardashian and Naomi Watts, one of these people is not an actor. The other two are multi-award winning actors. I would have said that Naomi Watts was the non-actor.
Yeah, that's what I mean, brown finger.
But I didn't mind Kim Kardashian's performance. I think it's perfectly, she's been sagged off and called wooden and all this stuff. I think her performance, I agree, is exactly what Ryan Murphy would have wanted. She gives exactly the performance she is hired.
She gives the same performance that she gives in every episode of Keeping Up in the Kardashians. Yeah. It's the same, or the Kardashians as it is now.
Yeah.
This is the same.
I thought she was absolutely fine. I think Naomi Watts doing her British accent and really, again, one projects, really looking like she doesn't want to be there.
Yeah.
And really just almost like...
Even if she got to keep all the clothes.
When you can see
you can keep the hunting cape. Okay, but it's still very hard for me to do this job.
There's a couple of scenes later on where she flies solo, and you go, oh, okay, yes, you can act. She's sort of going, oh, man, I'll just be me now. But when she's sitting in that awful boardroom that looks like AI generated, you're just like, oh my God, this is... I mean, there's no way you've won an Academy Award. I mean, it's an impossibility. Is it worth watching? I mean,
it's kind of like you can watch one episode of it. I don't think a lot of people could get all the way through because nothing changes.
We watched the first one, and I have to say I had a perfectly enjoyable time watching it because there's lots to think about while you're watching it, and you can really have an opinion about it. The only thing in television is, do you then watch the second one? And I mean, is there a point when you can just watch the GIFs? You know, I'll
just watch the... Like, I noticed that Halle Berry was supposed to be in it, but had a scheduling conflict.
Yeah, I bet she did.
And I feel I will have a scheduling conflict come up for all of the further episodes of this show. But, you know, I'm sure I'll enjoy the GIFs every time next time we hear who the new Director General is, we'll see a GIF from that show of Kim Kardashian going, well, how about that? On take 39 and saying, well, how about that with a glass of champagne?
Taking off a glove.
Yeah.
Any recommendations this week? Not all's fair.
It's not, although, you know, dive in and see if you enjoy it. I, having really struggled to find anything to watch at the cinema for the last month, went and saw Begonia, which I really liked, which is directed by Yorgos Lanthimos and written by Will Tracy and stars Emma Stone and Jesse Plemons. And it is really weird, funny. It's different. And I really enjoyed it.
So he's the same guy who directed Poor Things,
Favourite, all sorts of things like that. And this is actually a remake of a South Korean film, but it's definitely a bit different.
I saw an Onion headline which was Yorgos Lanthimos reckons he's about 3 movies away from hanging out with Emma Stone outside work.
She is brilliant. I will watch her in absolutely anything. She is mesmerising. I think she's fantastic.
Very much a podcast of two halves today. Thank you so much for anyone who both of those halves fitted within your realm of interest.
Yeah, because you're my spiritual twin in that case.
Yeah, exactly. We will be back on Thursday with a question and answer. I'm gutted we don't have like a bonus Celebrity Traitors episode this week. It's really quite good though that it's not long at all to wait for the regular one.
For the regular one. So I'm very much looking forward to that.
And I've had so many messages this week from people who've been saying, "Do you think I should do Celebrity Traitors? What about doing Celebrity Traitors?" And there's some very good names. By the way, our Q&A next week is going to be with Kate Phillips, who's the BBC's Chief Content Officer. So she's in charge of everything that goes on at the BBC. She's behind Celebrity Traitors, all that kind of stuff. If you've got any questions about the BBC's output, she's done everything. She's very, very, very smart. And anything you want to know about any of your favourite shows on the BBC or anything you just want to know about broadcasting in general, do send your questions to Kate. That's the rest is entertainment at goalhanger.com for your questions, and we will put them to her. But we will be back for a Q&A episode on Thursday. We also have the second part of our history of MTV for our members as well.
It's getting
on
even
Friday.
wilder on that one. And you can join at therestisentertainment.com for bonus episodes, ad-free listening. Otherwise, we will see you all on Thursday.
We will see you all on Thursday, unless Marina is appointed DG before then.